Welcome to my video on Kill Bill Volume 2 from 2004. I'm going to start the video with a spoiler-free review. I think I will be spoiling the first movie in the review itself. I mean, okay, if hypothetically, let's say you are watching this video, you haven't watched the first one yet, I would say, if I did my job right, by the end of the spoiler-free review of the first volume, you should know whether or not you want to watch that one. And if my video makes you want to watch Volume 1, then I believe you will also enjoy Volume 2. After the spoiler review of this video, I will get into what I call the thoughts section, where I discuss this movie in spoiler detail, but only for these two movies. The movie is rated R, so will this video be. And, yeah, I fucking love this one. Yeah. So, I think before we get too far into it, I definitely want to say, if you haven't already watched the Schnee video, you should only watch it after watching this movie, because it's, it does contain spoilers, but there's no way to discuss it in as much detail as he does without doing so. But once you've watched both of these movies, which I hope you will, if you haven't already, definitely watch his video. There's at least one part of this movie that I'm not sure I'm even gonna say very much about, because I think he covers everything, frankly, better than I could have. Now, part of the reason that I'm doing this now is that it is Women's History Month, which is also why I'm trying to make sure the video recommendation that I do for leftist YouTube videos, one per video of mine, is going to be of a woman. This time it will be Renati Pop. Why Dervin Didn't Deserve Melanie the Game. And this is a bit of a return to form for Tarantino as we continue the Tarantino theme. There's two left, and then I've covered all of them, because a bunch of them I did. Several of them I did when they first hit theaters. Right, for those who don't know, I'm doing about one per month. This month I did two, because the two volumes of Kill Bill suit Women's History Month so well. And, yeah, some people, prefer the, whether or not, which of these two you prefer is a matter of opinion. Overall, I do prefer Volume 1, but this one is also really solid. Right, I guess for those who don't yet know, I love every movie he's made that is not Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And yeah, I think, because the thing is, this one is closer to a lot of the things we expect from him that are present in Volume 1, but less so than usual for his films, and here they take back the reins, which I do think works. And I can imagine it plays even better if you watch, I think it's called The Whole Bloody Affair, which these days my back just can't quite handle the cinema trip. I think it did hit a theater near here, if it is ever released on DVD, and I appreciate that that's apparently at this point extremely unlikely, but if it does, I will watch it and do a separate video on that. But frankly, I'm not sure I have much to say that was not already said by, let's see if I can recall, because Marissa, if I can sort of look it up right now, I believe Nando did at least one. Did Captain Midnight maybe do one? That seems not unlike Pavlov. That rings a bell. But the I guess that does more or less cover the preamble. So I really appreciate about this one that they say as much on the DVDs behind the scenes. The first one asks questions, and this second part answers them. There are bits and pieces that we get more context for, maybe different camera angles on. And yeah, like by the end, I mean, there are still things that I find myself wondering, but I would argue they're not necessarily questions that need answering. The stuff we really need is here, and it is definitely one of his strongest endings. I'm not spoiling it, but he really got a lot right about it. And his endings do tend to be great. And to be clear, I'm not saying, that he's like perfect. I admire his artistry. I take issue with a number of the things he has said and stuff he supports and such in real life. And if you really hate his foot fetishism, which I don't blame you for, yeah, this one definitely does have that. I guess this is a decent time to say I don't kink shame, but when you insist on putting your fetish in your movies to the point where a non-zero number of the people you work with has specifically, like, let's see, I believe one warned one of the actors of a more recent film of his to not take her shoes off around Quentin. At that point, it's not really kink shaming. It's just like, okay, given that, I mean that, yeah, that's not just saying, oh, this is, a sex thing that is outside of the norm, which by itself is fine as long as you're getting consent, obviously. But that's, I mean, I don't have monetization to lose. How litigious is he? I'm just gonna leave. You can probably, yeah, like, I think that speaks for itself. Now, yeah, so the basically this is the the bride continuing on her roaring rampage of revenge, and we are spending a decent amount of time on at least one of the people that she goes after, which part one also did with Oren Ishii, but that is something I really quite appreciate about both of these, because it's the kind of thing, there's so many movies where they would just be kind of throwaway, just like, okay, so this character has this trait, and because of that you hate them and want to see the protagonist take them out, right? Which a lot of the time does work, but I appreciate the extra effort here. The yeah, that brings us nicely to, so the psychological accuracy, authenticity, and level of detail are all really excellent. There are these little touches where you get a sense of someone's relationship, even if you don't necessarily see them spend that much time together or exchange that many words or that sort of thing. And it adds depth to characters that otherwise, yeah, would just be tropes. There are a number of little authentic details that, if you don't know the cultural stuff that is being, the cultures being explored here, yeah, you wouldn't even think of. As one quick non-spoiler example, there's a distinction made between Chinese culture and Japanese culture, which, like, I remember, being a kid and teenager watching a bunch of American movies that kind of just flattened those into one big thing that they didn't really have any fucking clue what they were talking about there. And the level of detail, there's these tiny little blink and you'll miss it. Well, not always blink, but if you don't really, yeah, and they just add so much. Yeah, as a sequel, although I appreciate originally it was supposed to be just the second half, which I can imagine it plays better as, but it does still work really well. I did mention in my video on Volume 1, they came up with a great place to split it in half. And yeah, this one, it does presume that you remember part 1, which I do really appreciate that as, because, like, even if a lot of the people who watched this one had watched the first one in theaters, and that was deeply memorable. I forget how many months it was between the two movies, but, and hypothetically, you could almost definitely find, like, a recap of some kind, or I don't know, rent it or something before this came out. And this is definitely a movie that would have gotten bogged down if they had to reintroduce a bunch of things. Like, hypothetical, if you try to watch this without, I mean, it's right there in the title, Volume 2, but if you tried to watch this without knowing, at least through cultural osmosis, a lot about the first movie, you will be lost. And I really appreciate that. I mean, maybe that's something, the movie's over 20 years old. Like, in that time, like, we've gotten to a point where a bunch of movies that are sequels, they feel the need to reestablish everything, which I understand and appreciate, but sometimes it does really lead to a lot of clumsy dialogue and such. And here, as usual, for Tarantino, it's well written, it's well delivered. Every single thing said by a character is just great. There's so many little quotable things. And as usual, we have exploration of power dynamics as well as, like, distinctions between, yeah. So I don't think I want to give examples, but just, yeah, characters will say, I said this, I did not say that. And, you hear it and you're like, I hadn't really thought about it, but those are two different things, yeah, technically. And, yeah, just yeah, there's definitely some characters here who face one kind of abuse or another at the hands of someone who has more power than they do. And yeah, the direction is really great. It's one of those things where a lot of the time, if you take a story and you put it into multiple pieces, it can be very difficult. Like, momentum can really be lost, and I'm very impressed by how well this does at that sort of thing, because, like, it really doesn't feel like you know, and it doesn't feel the need to, yeah, it doesn't feel as though it's been, because the first time anyone was able to watch these two movies, other than, the people who worked on them, yeah, months apart, and it didn't really feel like, I distinctly remember watching this in theaters. It was actually one of my favorite, theater experiences, and it was because of the movie itself. It does a thing or two that if you didn't, if you, I guess a home theater can somewhat replicate it, but it's really, like, the first time you watch this, it should be on as big a screen as is financially viable for you. And yeah, the story and the emotion are captured and maintained so well, because this is the kind of thing where, once you've watched Revenge for a certain amount of time, after a while, if the people behind it are not careful, it can end up feeling like, okay, this is just like, it can get numbing. And you would especially think that after, the body count of the first one. This one does not try to replicate the body count. It does still have a pretty good amount of action. On the DVD, they say there's as much action. I beg to differ. But I will say that this one, where the first one, as mentioned in my video on that, does at times, the cinematography and editing, a tiny bit, you can see that it's the first time he's directing action like that. There are scenes of people shooting each other and such in other of his movies, including ones he made before Kill Bill Volume 1, but that was the first time, sword fighting, martial arts in general, it's not easy. I'm not speaking from experience. Fucking wish, but it's, you can sometimes tell when it's someone's first go at it. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we admire something like The Matrix so much, because that one really doesn't feel like it was being done by someone who didn't already, like, you would think that was like their 5th or maybe even 10th movie that had action rather than really first. It wasn't quite the first movie they made, but it was the first action. Anyway, other than that, the cinematography and editing, we again have the Tarantino style. This time, it filters spaghetti western, and he fucking nails it. Like, there's definite, Leone influence here, and it's just glorious to behold. Honestly, there's at least one part that felt, shit, is that a spoiler? I guess that's a spoiler. I'll talk about it in the thoughts section. And yeah, other really strong elements include production value, set design, locations, costumes, and makeup, all of which communicate things about the characters. You get to see where someone lives, maybe where they work, that sort of thing, and you really get a sense of place. And sometimes you don't even spend terribly long there, but you still feel like you can smell it, like it's in your clothes. Just, yeah, really, really effective. And the music this time is at least partially handled by Robert Rodriguez. Now, I have said before, I love some of his early work. To this day, honestly, even Bedhead, I know not everybody loves that, but El Mariachi, Desperado, From Dusk Till Dawn, Sin City, and Machete Kills, which I'm pretty sure Machete Kills is not technically his early work, the rest of it is. Yeah, I think all of those are really, really strong, and there's stuff, shit, I'm sorry, it's saying something about the it's like overworked. I'm sorry, there's not really anything I can do about it. At some point I probably will get a new computer that will hopefully be able to do this, yeah, without that. Anyway, yeah, I've found things to love about The Faculty, and honestly, Spy Kids 1, yeah, I understand what he was going for, and there's things that really work. And, Four Rooms, fun. Both of their segments are... Honestly, the entire thing has stuff that I did an entire video on it, so I'm not going to go too much into it here. As I've said in other... Right, and the second... Yeah, the first Machete and the second Sin City, I found things to love about them. So as I've said before, Rodriguez has strengths and weaknesses. Chief among his weaknesses is probably his writing, which at times really bears clear evidence that he just doesn't, he's not that invested. Like, he thinks of cool images and then looks forward to shooting and editing those. But, like, dialogue and motivation, stuff like that, story structure, just not quite as compelling. but along with direction, and to an extent, shooting and cutting, as he puts it, or at least put it. Oh, right. Yes, there are things I love about Once Upon a Time in Mexico. But among his strengths is dealing with music, and this has been the case from the very start. You know, you can go back and, yeah, like Bedhead and El Mariachi, it's right there. Like, it's genuinely impressive with what minuscule means he had, that he still manages a score that, you know, yeah. And he really brings it here, because, like, I mean, if I have to tell you that Robert Rodriguez can deliver a score that suits spaghetti western, I don't know, what can I say? You should watch some of his movies, I guess, because if you have watched, I guess not just any, but a good chunk of his, a significant percentage of his filmography would tell you that already. But it still bears repeating, you know, it's still just, yeah, amazing. That is something I truly have no idea why they didn't work more together. I mean, at this point, I mean, let's see. Tarantino's talking about making maybe one more movie. Rodriguez is semi-retired, I think. I feel like because he certainly doesn't make that much today compared to, like, I mean, goddamn, during the fucking 90s and early 2000s, he just, yeah, goddamn, you know, just a near constant barrage of them. But yeah, they work really well together. I wish they had made more back in their their shared heyday. Right, I guess I did also want to make sure to note that we once again have a nonlinear timeline, and it works really well how, like, in this one, it reminds me somewhat of some novels where you'll have this thing of, like, a character will end up in a situation, and we're thinking, wow, and then we get a flashback, and by the end of the flashback, we might return to that situation, and then we're like, oh. And I think that's as much as I can say about it without spoiling, so that's where we'll leave it. But it definitely is a case where, you know, sometimes, like, I would say something like Pulp Fiction, there are points of that where you're like, that's an interesting thing to cut to, and then we stick with it for a while, and then, you know, by the end of that movie, you understand everything that the movie really needs you to understand. In this one and some of his others, it is more like by the end of a scene, at least if it's a, you know, chronological jump, you almost definitely understand why you're seeing it. So the sound design is fantastic. We again do have some of the you know, wonderful, cheesy kind of, you know, from some East Asian action cinema, you know, and whoosh and stuff like that. Yeah, I do my own sound effects. No, I don't know why I've kept that up. I'm not 13 anymore. Anyway, the let's see. I don't know. In some ways, I guess I still have the maturity level of 1, which I guess means that if I bowed down to Trump, I could have a place in his cabinet. I think that does cover... Yeah, once again, like in Volume 1, it is not overused, these sound effects and such, nor the crash zooms and such. Right, I guess this is a decent time to just briefly say the DVD I have only has one deleted scene, but it has Michael Jai White, and it's possibly my favorite performance of his, and I quite like him, you know, but he's one of those actors who sometimes gets kind of a raw deal. I've never been bored watching him, which I think is a feather in his cap because he was in Universal Soldier: The Return, a movie that is outside of his scenes very tedious in many regards. And I say that as someone who still to this day really enjoys watching Van Damme movies. That's literally the only reason I watched that one. I much prefer the original Universal Soldier. I think the yeah, like Michael J. White, as with so many other, honestly, I'm not sure I can really think of an example of that an exception that proves the rule, but yeah, like he gets it. Everyone that Tarantino directs seems to get it. I guess that does. Yeah, this is also one of my favorite. Honestly, it might literally be top two right under Reservoir Dogs performances by Michael Madsen. The little smirk, the eyebrow thing he does. This kind of mix of charm and then also having this dark side, which is not as mentioned. I'm spoiling the first movie. We already know from the first movie he is a killer. And yeah, the relationship between him and Bill, I thought was compelling, even if not necessarily. They don't spend a huge amount of time on it, but I felt like I really got a sense of it. Like I could practically see these two, spending a lot of time together over years. I think but yeah, we have more of Bud, Michael Madsen's character, and L, Daryl Hannah. I think this might be my favorite, Daryl Hannah. I guess tied with the first because she's also got really great in the first, and I guess pretty much everything I've seen. I don't like every movie that I've seen her in, but she's always really, really solid in my experience. I haven't watched everything yet. Let's see. I can never remember if I did watch Wall Street. I will watch it at some point, and I intend to do a video. I've heard that she's underwhelming and miscast in that, and that's, it sucks. Sometimes someone's miscast, but, I also hold her in high regard for her Blade Runner work. I thought she was absolutely phenomenal in that. There are times in that movie where your eye is just drawn to her face, even if she's not necessarily really saying anything. It's just the look in her eyes. There's just, yeah. And, yeah, she's probably... Is that a spoiler? She's one of the ones I most remember from that movie, which, to be clear, has a stacked cast. Think it might be Uma Thurman's... This and Volume 1 are maybe her best work that I am familiar with, at least. And, once again, tried watching pretty much everything of hers that I could. Yeah, there's so much to her character. She is able to, yeah. And I continue to really appreciate it. I think I may have said that in my video on the first movie as well, but the distinction that she's able to make between, let's go with present day and then before the start of the first movie. Just how she used to be this... Let's see. When people say it about Kristen Ritter, they say bubbly personality. That's who she most reminds me of. The just smiling and being friendly and just, yeah. And I also really appreciate how Tarantino manages to, like, there's at least one character in this movie who says, oh, she's not that smart, but That character also comes across as a bit of a misogynist, so that's maybe what's going on there. You do get the sense that she understands and appreciates more than because they specifically talk about her hair being blonde more than once in separate scenes. That comes up, and I don't think that it's accidental that Tarantino cast a slim white American blonde woman, because a lot of people seem to think, and she's conventionally attractive. A lot of people seem to think that, women like that can, not really possess anything more than just sex appeal. And I really appreciate fighting back against that. Frankly, it is just a stereotype created by misogynists under patriarchy because they can't handle the idea that a woman might challenge them. And as someone who has two exes, both of whom were able to get me thinking and feeling things that I hadn't before, if you struggle with that, please try to overcome it, because there's nothing quite like, I mean, obviously, this also, I'm specifically talking to straight men here. There's nothing quite like, having a partner like that. Every so often, I'll still, see something in a way today that I didn't back then, even when it's something, brand new that I've never seen before. And yeah. Okay, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that there's some, because these days you gotta specify, you gotta make sure people don't think otherwise. Obviously, I'm not saying that there's something inherently wrong or lesser about anyone of any gender or anything. Hypothetically, if you are not the most educated, hey, neither am I. If you're not, the smartest, neither am I. I don't think people like that deserve less respect. And I think, I didn't used to feel the need to say that. I've always felt like, doesn't that just go without saying? Like, we're all human beings. But then these days, it's too much eugenicsy rhetoric on the far right, who, to a disturbing degree, have become just the regular right in countries like America. And I'm not saying that that means we should engage in violence against them. Violence should only ever be the last resort. It's so exhausting how many times we had to specify that since Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I'm not saying that there was absolutely no one on the left who were relieved when he died. I'm saying a lot of the people I saw doing that were people that Charlie Kirk had literally said that he thought were lesser, like inherently lesser. And some of the people accused of celebrating his death literally just quoted words he said, just to like remind people, hey, he wasn't Jesus fucking Christ, And let's please not pretend like conservatives in America, like big public figures, media personalities, I refuse to dignify them by calling them journalists. Listen, if you think that there are conservative journalists in America, how about you start by decrying people like, I might get in trouble for saying his name. I'll just say he had words, not very well thought out ones, about Somali immigrants in America. And he apparently is supposedly a journalist, according to prominent conservatives in America. But yeah, a number of them will very publicly celebrate the death of minorities, and then as soon as it happens to one of them, suddenly that's the worst thing in the world. I personally wish no one did celebrate death of any human being. I guess pretty much any living thing that isn't like literally an insect, and that's not me dehumanizing anyone. I mean literal insects. But I certainly do give more leeway to those who have had their lives made worse, maybe even literally threatened, when they celebrate the death of someone who was responsible for that. I'm not saying the only person responsible for it, but he had quite a reach, and he chose to use it to put down people that he shouldn't have. Anyway, I guess that does pretty much cover. In this one, we do meet Bill proper, and he is deeply compelling. I guess I don't think I want to say exactly who plays him. I'll just say it's someone I respect for their other work as well. And yeah, absolutely amazing job here. It's the kind of thing of like you almost wouldn't believe that they could possibly get it quite right, because like this is a character we've been waiting for once again, I don't remember the number, but months, because like that was one of the big things when we walked out of the theater of Volume 1. It was like, can't wait to see Bill himself, We only got to hear his voice, and not terribly much either. And yeah, the pacing is about what we expected for the length and for a movie that was both written and directed by Tarantino. It's around 2 hours if you don't count the end credits, and yeah, like it uses that time well. Nothing feels padded. This was back when Sally Menke was still ensuring that yeah, she really knew how to kill Tarantino's darlings. And yeah, so the action, while there isn't as much of it, I do really appreciate how varied and creative it gets. Because like as soon as you say, okay, so the preferred weapon here is, these swords, if you're not careful, you can kind of end up with just, blending a little bit together. Like that's something that happened in, I guess that's a spoiler for that particular property. So instead I'll use, I believe the movie's called Ninja Assassin. I enjoyed watching that as I was watching it, and then right after I read those reviews, and one of them said, oh, those action scenes kind of blend together. Did not mean to use that word. I was trying to say oh. The action scenes kind of blend together, and as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, fuck, that's absolutely true. And it is well paced. None of the action scenes go on for too long. There's not really too much time in between scenes of, if not action, at least tension, other intensity. And yeah, so as far as violence goes, it is not the most of Tarantino's, but it does have at least one of the things that when people think Tarantino sure does like, gory violence in his movies, there's one particular thing in this one that's near the top of the list of examples. And it is one of those cases where that's a spoiler. I'll get into that afterwards. Yeah, we're almost at the thought section anyway. Yeah. I rate this 8 roaring rampages of revenge out of 10. And with that, we get into, there we go, the thoughts section. So once again, from here on out, there will be spoilers for everything in this movie. I'm not purely going to go chronological. So, yeah, I think it's a good place to start to finish my thought on the... So as far as, you know, violence goes, there is violence against women in this. It is... Some of the violence is also committed by women, and I appreciate that that does not make it automatically okay, you know, as nice as it would be, as much as feminists have been fighting for that for 100 years, I guess, by now. Men and women are not currently quite considered equal, not in the eyes of the law and not in cultural, you know, so yeah. But I do appreciate that, yeah, some of the violence is carried out by women. I guess that pretty much, yeah, I think I'm gonna try to keep it chronological, or, you know, the order that the scenes appear in the actual movie. But yeah, I quite appreciate it, you know. So it opens with talking about how, you know, a lot of people get details wrong of the massacre. And then she points out, you know, it wasn't technically the wedding, it was the rehearsal, which does technically mean that she wasn't an actual bride, even though she has been called that. She was a bride-to-be. She was a fiancé, you know. How, you know, she was Plimpton's wife-to-be. But they do such a great job of capturing the atmosphere, and then, of course, Tarantinos it up with first the threat and then the execution of violence. I kind of love the idea that Rufus is indeed Jules from Pulp Fiction. And I'm not going to spoil that movie here, but I appreciate the idea that this is what ends up happening to that character after the events of Pulp Fiction. You know, he is in this movie in a situation where you would think there couldn't possibly be violence. Who the fuck kills people in a church during a wedding rehearsal, you know? But he may have been through with the past, but the past wasn't through with him. It wasn't even personal, at least not for him specifically. It was Beatrix they were going after. And you know, Plimpton, everybody else was essentially collateral damage. I mean, purposefully, yes, but if nobody had been in the building other than Beatrix, you know, I can imagine they would still have gone after Plimpton, but that would have been it. But this idea that he tried to leave behind the world of violence, and then, you know, it found him in the least likely place. I think there's certain poetic justice to the idea of someone who made the world a more violent place, unable to completely escape it himself, you know. And as usual, you know, Sam Jackson is just amazing. And I really appreciate seeing, you know, it's a very low-key performance. He's not loud. He's not even in too much, terribly much of the movie. There's no such thing as too much Sam Jackson. But he still makes an impression. You know, people still remember him after watching. And yeah, the details, you know, this thing of how there's some giggling at the thought of, you know, shoving their tongues down each other's throats in front of everyone, and the priest, like, clearly he's like, this again, you know, every time he officiates a wedding between two young people, which, you know, in the South, Sometimes happens more than it should. Like, just to be clear, I don't have a problem with marriage as such. Like, I think basically, marriage, monogamy in general, it's for some people. I don't think anybody should be pressured into it who doesn't like the idea of it, because it makes a lot of people miserable. Like, all those misogynistic jokes about, this man really hates his wife, and maybe she hates him too. Yeah, a lot of the time that's because they would have been happier if they weren't married, maybe weren't even monogamous, maybe weren't together with each other at all. And a lot of the time, if a woman really hates a man, it's either his fault, more or less directly, or the fault of patriarchy. I think once you actually look at all the things women have to endure under patriarchy, not giving them a significant amount of grace. Like, I remember some years back, a woman, a friend of mine who was a woman, I don't think she really thought about it as she was saying. She was talking about her exes, and she said the words, "I hate men," and I knew not to say present company excluded, I hope, because she's just venting. She's not talking about me. If she had been, she would have made that clear. She was talking about other men, and some of us men, cishet, maybe especially white. I don't think I know enough about non-whites to say for sure, and I don't think it's really my place to judge. Yeah, when I was much younger than now, it was necessary for, and it was, I think it was YouTube, frankly. Yeah, feminists on YouTube that helped me appreciate, through one-way communication, not so much conversation, but me watching their videos. I appreciated just how, yeah, I guess I've made my point. I'm just belaboring at this point. And there's no point. And I think that does bring us to the, let's see. Yeah, so just the sheer joy on Beatrix's face. And everyone, like, the priest and his wife are like, ugh, this again. And Rufus is like, he's going to play for them, but it's, I don't know, he doesn't sound like giddy at the thought, but he is taking pride in his work, but the rest of them, so excited about this wedding, and then, understandably, Beatrix needs a little bit of air, and she takes a few steps, and it's like, not really as beautiful music, and then she's like, oh shit, it's diegetic, that's neat. And then she realizes there's only one person who would bring diegetic music into this scene. And she doesn't even need to say it. Like, she just goes out to visually confirm. Like, she might as well have said, Bill, is that you? Before even seeing, And that's such a great way to introduce him. And he plays that flute again during the, as he talks about Pai Mei. And, it's, shit, right now I forget. Is it maybe they're at the end of the house that it's also at least visible? And yeah, it's just a thing he does. And this detail that this, hardened killer also plays this gentle instrument. Like, when you think of like, oh, this is a fictional character who likes, or who carries out violence, but also plays music. I mean, your first thought is something like electric guitar or drums or something like that, something aggressive or hypothetically aggressive. I appreciate it doesn't have to be, but yeah, not only is it not an aggressive instrument, but what he plays on it also is not something like, normally you wouldn't be terrified. And I appreciate the contrast there, and also just, yeah, communicating to young men, some of whom are misogynists, homophobes and such. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. I used to play an instrument. I wasn't any good at it, but yeah, there's, you know. Anyway, I think that might... Yeah, I really like the distinction between, he says, I've never been nice a day in my life, but I'll try to be sweet. And then, the thing about, like, she says that's one of your best sides, and he says that's why you're the only person who's seen that. Which, yeah, that does come through in, the interactions between him and Beatrix versus him and Elle. And him and Bud, for that matter. Though with Bud, it is also kind of mutual. They needle each other kind of thing. And yeah, like she lets herself believe, and so does he, that he's not there for violence. He's there just to witness, because that's the thing that happens. Sometimes you'll see your ex, get married. Like if you are a big enough person, that can be a thing. And then the camera, right. Sorry, before the camera, I also wanted to note, yeah, the thing about, as soon as Plimpton comes closer, she slips back into Arlene, and which, bookends well with there at the end, where he says, he talks about Superman, which I right now forget exactly who, but there was a really excellent leftist YouTuber who did a video talking about Tarantino broke Superman, I think it was called. Yeah, fantastic analysis, as usual, for that YouTuber. But yeah, this thing of like alter ego wearing a disguise, like it's very, very clear from the movie that at least before the very, very end, after she's indeed gone through with it, and, yeah, after she does kill Bill, Volume 2, she is technically the more hardened person. She just sometimes puts on an act. And we saw that in the first one when she, pretends to just be a silly tourist when talking to Hattori Hanzo. And, yeah, as soon as Plimpton approaches, which is also like, on the one hand, he's maybe just checking up on her because, like, are you okay? It's, she's been out there for several minutes now. And also, I think he had the idea, he maybe heard a male voice out there, and a lot of cishet white men do not like when their female partner is talking to someone that they don't know who is male. Like, it's this ridiculous idea that just, I mean, she's just going to cheat me. Listen, I think you might be projecting, because the number of the men who feel that way is because they would cheat if they got a chance to. That's, yeah. I think but yeah. And she says, oh, this is my dad, Bill. Or he says, don't call me father-in-law. Call me Bill, practically chokes on it. And then, yeah, the thing about like, oh, you were supposed to be in Australia digging for silver. Because that's a good explanation for how, because like she had to elope, she had to hide from Bill, and he still found her. And then you have the thing about the right, also the line, he doesn't waste any time, like, wow. And let's see, I guess that pretty much brings us to the, let's see. Yeah, Plimpton suggests, you should give her away. And Bill says that's not okay with him, So we do have that clear distinction there. even before the violence, he makes it clear to Beatrix that's not going to happen. That's, yeah. And then the camera pulls out in a way that is, this was what I almost said in the review, because it was like, it happened so early, but I was so happy that I didn't know it going into the movie the first time, so I didn't want to take that away from someone else. It felt like spaghetti western, like Sergio Leone by way of Brian De Palma as filtered through Tarantino, because it has all three, and the way that the divas are standing there and then they walk in, and I love that you hear some violence, you don't see any because like these two movies have enough violence as it is, but one thing you do hear very distinctly, because some of the shouting and screaming is you can't really make out words. Bill O'Reilly would say, other than the word Bill, this scene has no real intelligible words, or that segment of it anyway. Remember that racist piece of shit said something so fucked up? The song wasn't in English, Bill. Do you understand that there are other languages than English in the world, Bill? Because it sounds like you don't understand that. Which, once again, like, I'm sorry, there are children who understand that concept. Even ones who haven't heard other languages yet. Anyway, one word that rings out distinctly is Bill. And you can tell from the tone, it's not that Beatrix is like, Bill, duck. One of your enemies must have followed you here and is killing us by accident. She knows that it's him. And it's possible that she's also recognizing their faces because they're not exactly covering, but even so, like, just, you could at least say she's not so shocked that she doesn't even cry out, Bill. She manages that as she realizes that he is doing this. And right now I forget if was that before or after. Anyway, we also have the bit where she drives and talks directly to the camera, which is just such a wonderful, you just don't see that much anymore. And it is, like, obviously it can be very corny and cheesy. I think, Tarantino is one of the writer directors who can still make that work. And I think, maybe we need more like that. It's, I've always found it frustrating that after a while, certain things in media just fall out of fashion and then we barely see them anymore, when some of them just have a charm to them you can't replicate. This kind of thing, I would argue, in my opinion, is one of them. I've said before, I also feel like something like claymation is one of them. Just, there's nothing quite like it. And let's see, and we get the title drop, and then instead of writing the title, she says, I am gonna kill Bill, and then the text is Volume 2. Very nicely done there. And I think that does bring us to the so Bill and Bud talking, and just immediately, it is also said. Right now I forget if it was said in the first one. That's part of why I didn't say it in the spoiler review. But yeah, they are brothers, and in this one you really can tell. They have these little, like one of the things is just the fact that Bud lies about the Hattori sword when it's like, Bill's trying to help protect you. He's trying to save your life, and not only are you going to put the idea in his head that you can't necessarily defend yourself against a sword, you're going to say that it was because of that. Because, like, hypothetically, it would have fucked with Bill's mental state if Bud had said, oh, someone broke in and stole it. That would have still been like, oh, that's, I can't believe you're not more careful. But no, he says he pawned it, and for $250 too. Like, that's such a, And he has nothing to gain other than just to fuck with Bill, because he does still have the sword. He's just not intending to use it, that's all. And yeah, that's very much this kind of brother dynamic, you know. And I really appreciate the detail that, you know, there weren't really 88 of them. They just called themselves that. I don't know. I guess they thought it sounded cool, you know, because it is like, yeah. I didn't count, but I don't think there were quite 88 of them. And it is also just, yeah, you know, it's a cool idea, and it feels very. I've seen I've watched just enough East Asian, you know, martial arts cinema to know that, you know, names like that are popular. I guess this is a decent time to briefly note I have not myself watched Kung Fu. I appreciate that is at least part of why Carradine is playing the role here, you know, and that's as much is said on the DVD. That's also part of why he appears in actual Yellowface in the second Crank movie, you know, very clear reference. Anyway, which I'm not making apologies for, excuses for, whatever. I think that does get us to the yeah, it was great seeing Bud at work, or rather not at work. You know, he's 12 minutes late and immediately chewed out by the boss. And we have that little detail where Bud points out, there's no one here. Why do you need me here 12 minutes ago when even right now there's nothing for me to do here? It's just power move. It's capitalism, baby. It's, you know, just this bullshit of like, if you've never had a boss who just wanted to fuck with you to feel powerful, you probably don't work in America, is what I can, you know. I'm extremely fortunate that I've never had, you know, I live in Denmark and not in one of the biggest cities. I have heard horror stories from, like, I guess you can't say Copenhageners, can you? Københavner would be the Danish, but yeah, people from Copenhagen. Anyway, yeah, you know, he makes a really good point. And then the other guy's like, oh, so you're saying I don't need you? I think he's just pointing out that it's not really, like, listen, if you wanted to say, okay, you're 12 minutes late, I'm going to dock your pay by the equivalent, you know. I don't know, I feel, or tell him, you know, you're going to stay 12 minutes, you know, longer. Okay, I mean, I guess that's more or less fair as anything under capitalism, I mean. But no, he's specifically like, don't come to work for the next several days, you know, and you'll just stay at home until I call you. So you're admitting you don't actually need him then, is what you're really saying, you know, like, it's just such a ridiculous, yeah. And yeah, then we find out, oh yeah, you know, he cleans toilets. You know, he's it's even specified, and I appreciate Tarantino not showing it to us because we know he'll show us gross stuff like the eye being crushed. That was what I was referring to in this Brother Free review when I said that's, you know, that's close to the top of the list of something people think of when oh, Tarantino, oh right, gross stuff, you know. So, but yeah, shit water all over the floor is, I believe, a direct quote from Rocket. And yeah, there's not even like, hey, please, can you do this? It's just kind of expected. You know, how many times has he done this or equally gross stuff, you know? Shit. Have they ever pressured him to vote Republican? Because that's almost one of the only things I can think of that's as disgusting as that. Is that too far? I did say being pressured into it. Nuance. And yeah, that's a thing that happens. There are people in America who are sometimes pressured into voting a certain way, and there's an actual, they'll be threatened to be fired if they don't. And that's just one example of how capitalism can be deeply anti-democratic. Problem with communist dictatorships is not the communist part, it's the dictatorship part. And right now, America, in some ways, more than a number of people would like to admit, is a dictatorship. For all intents and purposes. I'm not saying in every single way. And yeah, you still have your precious capitalism. How are you liking the fact that you cannot afford groceries because the same motherfucker keeps getting voted into office? No matter how much he ruins things. Just like, this really is the hold my beer term for Trump. You know, if you thought he was bad the first time. And he was. Anyway, I think that does pretty well cover... I guess I'll just very briefly note, I think by now, pretty much everyone can admit that if you've seen some of the things he said and such, it's pretty clear he is in cognitive decline. And I'm not saying like, oh, you know, lock him up. I mean, I would love to see him engage in restorative justice, but I appreciate, you know, once cognitive decline is significant enough, that's not really an option anymore. I don't think he should have the power that he does, because it's very clear, like, I'm not the first person to note this. He genuinely doesn't seem to care anymore about very much that happens. Like, people will say to his face, hey, here's the thing, you're the president, you should be fixing this, here's why it's a problem. And he's just like, okay. I don't think that should be anything less than disqualifying. I think you should be immediately removed. Like, is this not, you know, pretty significant part of the reason we even have vice presidents and such? Or y'all do, I mean. Here in Denmark, it's called something else. Now that I think about it, I'm not entirely sure. Do we have... I guess we have a slightly different system. I don't get enough sleep to remember all these things anymore. Anyway, yes, so it's ironic because we actually recently had an election, so this should be fresh in my mind. Anyway, back pain makes it hard to sleep. I think that does bring us to... So yeah, you know, Bud goes home to this trailer. And yeah, just like, I really appreciate how we see what the divas have done since retiring from diva-ing. Especially because by the end, Elle is the only one left alive. And I mean, is she gonna live long? Like, unless someone like goes and helps her, I'm guessing no. I will discuss, you know, I'll just very briefly note here, as someone who has, you know, I already mentioned, yeah, back pain. I have some, yeah. As such, I don't love, and I'm not saying you need that to, but I don't love when a piece of media basically treats a disability as like a punishment for something bad done, because like that is literally, you know, people used to think, some people still do, that like if you are disabled during life, it must be because you did something to deserve it. You know, maybe you were careless with something, which sometimes is the case, but not always. Lots of the time is not the case. Please never blame someone for something that is visually, like, I've said it before, but it bears repeating. If you're seeing someone and you judge them for something visual, like, it should pretty much be like MAGA hat, neo-Nazi tattoo, blackface, that sort of thing. That's white person doing blackface, that's not having a black face. But there are even people who will judge people who were born disabled and say, oh, well, it's God's will, you know, you must deserve this. It's just so fucked up. And yeah, the idea of it still plays into that, because she is the bride is getting revenge on all these. And yeah, I don't know. I think a significant case could be made that it should have been another death, And I do appreciate someone pointed out, technically, the bride, the only, yeah, of the divas or related, the only that she kills in this movie is Bill himself. She leaves Elle alive, though she might die like that, and Bud is killed by Elle. And I think that does, but yeah, so, Green ended up with a family, but Beatrix killed her for what she did in the past. Oren Ishii became absurdly powerful, leader of this crime syndicate, still ended up dead. So both, these are two very distinct things that in different ways ought to protect someone. There's so many characters who would see Green's life and be like, I can't go through this, I'll leave her be. Because you could still have had a scene. You could have had her approach, and instead of punching, because note that Bride throws the first punch. Instead, she says, I'm not here to fight. I need information on Bill. That could have been it. It could have been a friendly conversation that culminates in her getting information, maybe even a good luck. And, some mention of, I'm glad you at least got to keep your kid, or something, And Oren, it wasn't 88, but it was, a couple dozen maybe, bodyguards and such. And yeah, she's, and her own, in both cases, they're very significant skills, and they don't, they still perish at Bride's hands. Bride made them dead. And yeah, so we see that Bud, it just didn't really go well for him. Like, he has one of the lowest statuses that you can in capitalism. He has a very low-paying job that he clearly isn't passionate about. He doesn't even really argue for, like, he's basically just saying, he is, I appreciate that, his boss is calling him out for, he is technically expressing that he doesn't really care about this thing. It's just, I think the boss goes way too far, And let's see, I think that does cover the, let's see. Yeah, it is one of these things of, like, basically he maybe didn't think it through so much. Like, we don't really know why he ended up quite like that, but I can imagine that Oren and Green were both more motivated, more passionate about making sure that their life after the Divas was, truly amazing. And, right, just to briefly note, Elle, during this movie, is still working for, or let's see, I guess she is Bill's partner, basically. And that's her, sort of version of retiring. Anyway, then we have the, let's see. Yes, so that's the, so yeah, he goes home, and you can tell, he can sense something, and turns out she's hiding under. And she sees that, oh, he's just on the chair, and then there's, a noise, and he stands up, and then he sits back down, and, we realize afterwards he stood up, got the shotgun, and then, sat down. And that is genuinely clever, because, yeah, traditionally you would think, oh, sitting down, not a threat. And yeah, she opens the door, tries to rush him, and he shoots her. And I love that it is just like 30 seconds or so before he makes clear, because like at first I was thinking like, how is she not dead? But he explains, it's, what did he say, rock salt, which I have heard is an actual thing. You can put that in a shotgun, and it won't kill, but it'll hurt significantly. And the grossness of, first she spits in his face, which we know she does. She did that several times in the first as well, sometimes by reflex. In this case, Bud spits back, and he's got a mouthful of that nasty chewing. You know what? If it's something you want to do, it's not for me to judge. I'm saying it's nasty to spit that shit in someone else's face, even if they just spit. I mean, the bride, all that was, but like, yeah, regular spit. But yeah, and I do appreciate, they went to the effort of making it. I mean, obviously, so I know enough about filmmaking to know, if you don't see both characters in the same shot as it's happening, then no, that actor did not spit on that other actor. That's just not what happened. They have like these little things that to make it seem like it's someone spitting on, because it's gross to spit directly in someone else's face. Again, not kink shaming here. If that is what you're into, I'm not saying it's gross. I'm saying outside of a sexual context. Yeah. And I think that does get us to the but yeah, they did a good job making it look particularly disgusting. And then later it's the whole thing that he spit, the spittoon I think it's called, is thrown, it's, yeah, the contents on Elle's face. And see, that's the thing. I don't think that's going too far, because she is a really vicious character. I appreciate like the catharsis of her, of something unpleasant happening to her. And I'm not necessarily saying that it would have been wrong if the character had ended up dead by the end, because like she's going to keep, if she has a chance, she's going to keep coming. I think there was a while where there were like theories that maybe there's going to be a volume 3 and it's going to be all Elle trying to kill Beatrix, but yeah. I mean, she couldn't even beat Beatrix. How could she kill her? But yeah, I think that does bring us to the, yeah, and so he tranks her, and then she wakes up, and it's one of those things where, like, on the one hand, that's got to be fucking horrifying to wake up to see, but on the other, I'm like, that is a very nice composition, because like, it's all right there. In that one shot, you understand what's about to happen. Because you see a tombstone, you see someone digging up the grave in front of it. Then you see, your as your eye, like we I think it was Folding Ideas who noted in his excellent video on the editing of Suicide Squad that the human brain is hardwired to seek out faces. So we see the skull, we see the rest of the skeleton, we see the open coffin, and immediately, we don't even need anyone to say, oh, that's her, that's the person who was buried there. We don't need anyone to spell out, yeah, she's going to be there. She's been buried alive. She's going to be there until she dies, is what they expect to happen, And yeah, she struggles, and then we have the thing about, he warns her rather than immediately pepper spraying her directly in the face, because she's not being as obedient as he would like, which frankly does make him at least slightly better, in at least that one regard, than some ICE and cops in America. So yeah, something to note. And yeah, we have the thing about, the other guy. I'm afraid I forget his name, but he's played by a person with dwarfism. I'm trying to make sure I say it the more sensitive way. I mean, no disrespect to any minority. And yeah, he says that he gives that old misogynistic line about like, oh, women think that men have a problem with the silent treatment, which, like, listen, I've talked to a number of misogynists. If you don't already know, let me just tell you, for a lot of them, that's cope. They fucking hate it. They can't stand it. But they're too proud to admit that. A lot of misogynistic men cannot handle the idea of a woman having any kind of power over them, making them feel something they don't want to feel. And I have encountered misogynists who will literally pretend like it is somehow worse for a woman to do the silent treatment to a man than for a man to rape a woman. And that's how dehumanizing misogyny can get. I think that does bring us to... Let's see. Yeah, so ultimately she doesn't say more, and they put her in the coffin. And so this is the part that in theater was just fucking amazing. The darkness, and we just like we do see some close-ups of the nails, but there's like a minute or two of just complete darkness inside the coffin, and we're just hearing dirt be spread onto it. And that's one of those things where I can just see Tarantino crumpling up the studio note, throwing it in the wastebasket that said, can you maybe, just in case, shoot, film just some of the top of the coffin being covered in dirt, because like some people would probably prefer to see it like that. No, this is the way to do it, because like the point here is how horrifying this is for her. And yeah, like no wonder that she spends several seconds really deeply upset before she starts focusing, and then carries out, and it really is like deeply impressive how she manages to get the rope off her, because it's tied around the boots, so she takes the boots off, and she's got the little razor inside one of the boots, which she uses to cut the rope of her hands. And then we see Pai Mei. And so I understand from the DVD that the actor who plays Pai Mei here, in his youth, fought Pai Mei. So that is a cool way to do that. And I guess this is a decent enough time to briefly note, so the deleted scene, it's Michael Jai White and Bill fighting because Bill killed his master. And he just he does the laugh, and the way he talks, and they've got the zooms and everything. It's just fucking amazing, and Bill barely has to make an effort. I do really appreciate that throughout, like, we never really see Bill just in like, in a battle where it seems like, oh, he's actually gonna lose, like they're evenly matched. Ren and the bride seem evenly matched, but with Bill it tends to be he's got the upper hand, kind of thing. And right, and yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about is the deleted scene shows that for a little while they're I don't know, maybe not many seconds, I don't think, but they're fighting. Oh right, and there's this really funny running gag where so at first it's Michael Jai White and several of his he's got several people with him, and then Bill on the other side, and Beatrix just standing and watching for most of it. And he also says, I have a lady here, should we maybe do this some other time? But yeah, every so often some civilian will stumble upon it, and they'll just like bow and then move past or something. And then once some people are dead, some people see it and they scream, and then they run off, just because it's a very public fight. And yeah, during a little bit of the fight, they both sheathe, I think, first Bill sheathes his sword, and then Michael Jai White appreciates, this is how we're fighting now, to be honorable. And then Bill slides open his sheath, just not terribly much, but enough to slice the throat And it's also like it barely fucking touches his neck, but throat, but it still cuts enough to kill because that's Hattori Hanzo. And then there at the end, she manages to get the sheath on his sword, and that enables her to do the 5-palm exploding hand touch. Exploding heart touch, something along those lines. Anyway, yeah, I think that does bring us to so yeah. Pai Mei, fantastic with the description, and let's see the thing about like she's like, when will I see you again? And then he says, that's the title of my favorite soul song. And she goes, what? Which that, more than anything else that Tarantino's ever written, well, I guess it's not impossible. I haven't watched Death Proof yet. It's coming in within a month or so. But I think this might be the line written by Tarantino that is the most something I believe actually happened in a conversation between him and someone else. Because I can totally see someone saying, I don't know if it was those exact words, but saying something, and then he's like, oh, pop culture, that's a pop culture reference, and the other person being like, I tried to ask you a question, like, can't you just talk like a normal person? And I say that as someone who can't either. And let's see, I think but yeah, the thing about, well, Pai Mei will let me know when you're ready. And then he's, the thing about, like, he hates white people, he despises Americans, and he has nothing but contempt for women, so it could be a while. Wow. And I think, that I really do appreciate how many male misogynists harming women these 2 volumes have, in contrast to the bride who, she doesn't only harm men, she is taking revenge, and yeah, I said what I have to say about that theme in my video in the first one. I'm just saying I appreciate that it's continued here. Because I mean, in this one we have one of the most misogynistic, there's literally, so if I understand correctly, that word is offensive, so I'm not going to use it, but there is, yeah, Esteban, his job, now you know what word I'm avoiding using, and that is, like, one of the worst things you can do to one or more women as a man. And it's disturbing how in the years since, there's a non-zero number of men who have become extremely popular in the manosphere for engaging and or encouraging others to engage in that exact thing. Because I thought that misogynists used to say that men protect women, and then you have that being such a major, like, maybe when they say protect, what they mean is have power over. Maybe they don't see a distinction there. Maybe it's newspeak, because if they say that, every so often you do get misogynists just openly saying that they think men should rule women, which, like, we tried that for thousands of years. A lot of the worst things in human history happened during that period, and women suffered immensely for no fucking reason at all. I'm not saying that all suffering can be avoided. I appreciate sometimes it can build character, but it was completely disproportionate. Anyway, yeah, the entire training with Pai Mei is fantastic. The way he mocks her, and yeah, we have the thing about, her Mandarin Chinese is not very good, and she does not speak Cantonese, and her Japanese is of no interest to him. Which, once again, I think I did point that out in my video on the first one. There is a distinction to be made, and a lot of white Westerners, like, I'll admit, I don't think I fully understood when I first watched this, back when it was in theaters originally. I don't think I fully appreciated it, and then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, I understand why Chinese and Japanese have some issues with each other. And yeah, he starts yelling at her and hitting her, saying she's like a dog. And yeah, that first fight where he's like, choose a weapon, and if you can strike me, I will bow to you and call you master. So immediately we understand, okay, this is, she's probably not gonna win. And she looks great doing it, and he just, manages to make her seem like unimpressive. And over the course of it, she does get to a point where she is really impressive. And we don't see her, Kool-Aid Manning through one of the boards, but we realize once we see her in the coffee, once we're back from the flashback, which, as mentioned in a spoiler review, this is consistent throughout the movie. When there is a jump back in time and then it goes back to the present, we understand, yeah. And I really appreciate one of the first things we see here is more of Bill, and that's the first time we see the two of them together. Not here, but see. And we understand the relationship between them and why he did what he did and why she so badly wants revenge. And I think that does... Right, and obviously, I'm not saying that there was any justification for what he did. Anyway, I think that pretty much gets us to... Yeah, and at one point she sleeps... she's having nightmares. It's, essentially like PTSD, and she wakes up, she punches in her sleep, and then wakes up like screaming about the pain. And yeah, we get the silhouette shot of them both engaging in martial arts, and she's now, matching him. Very, very cool. And I think... Right, also really appreciate fucking, fire. Like, I'm not sure it's actually 100% natural lighting, but it's very convincing, facsimile. Yeah, fireplace storytelling, once again, like, we don't see that enough in movies. It's, like, I've had, I used to be a scout, and then, thankfully, I was allowed to not be a scout anymore, because I was fucking terrible at it. Mom insisted. But on me being one, it wasn't because of her that I left. On the contrary, but yeah, there is something to sitting around a fire and being told a story, and obviously storytelling is important to Tarantino. And then let's see, yeah, we see her break out, and it's just the catharsis. I appreciate that it's not like immediate. There's so many movies where it would just be like one punch is like, oh, wow, but no, it's like, I don't know, 10 punches or something, and we see some of the dirt come on, and I'm sitting there the first time thinking like, I really hope this doesn't, because like, I can appreciate, okay, she can probably dig her way out, but like, she could, like, that's got to be really horrifying being. And I also appreciate that Uma Thurman, I mean, she was put through too much on these movies, and yeah, caused a rift for a while between her and Tarantino. But it could have been worse. There are movies where her head would basically have been covered by, the dirt. And then we get my favorite line in the entire movie. We see her walking. That's also very Sergio Leone, this thing, the fade between as she walks closer and closer, further and further through all this desert. And then suddenly, there's the cafe, and she walks up, and the guy's like, what the fuck? And with his eyes, not verbally. And she walks in and sits down. May I have a glass of water, please? It's so perfect. Like, just the understatement of that is just fucking beautiful. Because, like, I feel like she'd probably like more than that, but that's what she can get right now, like, just, yeah. And let's see, I think the next thing is Elle on the road, which is also really cool. I'm not really a car person, I'm not a Transformer, but I appreciate how cool that thing looks, and Elle looks fantastic in it. And yeah, she goes up and gets the information, writes it down on a little notepad, and we find out shortly after she had other stuff on the notepad already. And yeah, that thing about, is that her Hattori Hanzo? That's my money on the floor? Then it's your Hattori Hanzo now. And also later, the Hattori Hanzo, which will shortly be mine. But yeah, the entire conversation. And I love that he's mixing some drink. I don't know alcohol, but I appreciate how messy parts of it look. It doesn't look neat. He doesn't look like a bartender. He looks like, yeah, I mean, she says, he's basically an alcoholic. He knows what he's doing, but he's a little sloppy about it because he doesn't care. And he doesn't even care even though she's there and witnessing it. I would not let company see me in that state. And yeah, all the little details about it. And let's see. Yeah, so he starts counting the money, or not counting, but taking him out. And suddenly there's a snake. And just fantastic physical performance by him. And yeah, bites him on the cheek twice. Just can't help but kiss him. And which is fair enough. I can think of a lot of people who couldn't if they were that close to Michael Madsen. I mean, I hope they'd ask consent first. Otherwise, it'd be sexual assault. But yeah, and then as he's lying there, she flips on the notepad and explains. Oh right, shit. So obviously there's the yeah. So I do want to go a little bit into detail. Love the whole thing about which R word, relief or regret. And she says both, and he says, I didn't ask if it was both. I said which one was more. He asked which are you filled with. He didn't say is it both or is it one. And she admits once he's dying that she hates that he got to kill the greatest warrior she'd ever met, and then she fights. And in the DVD they talk about it's what was the word, like a battle of two Amazons, and it is super cool. And that's something like sometimes filmmakers just know better than we audience members what we deep down want. And yeah, I'm sorry, by 2004 I did badly want to see these two actresses duke it out like that. It was incredibly fucking cool. And there's just enough, like they're both conventionally attractive, but there's what's the word? There's enough of a difference in like body type, I guess is the term, that it's interesting. Certainly one would think that Daryl Hannah is the stronger physically, but maybe Uma Thurman has more agility, And I thought they did a good job on that. And just the way that they smash each other into shit and throwing things at each other and all this, yeah. But yeah, as he's lying there, she says, I looked something up on the internet. And I fucking love that Tarantino can have us on the edge of our seat as someone literally reads fucking Wikipedia, and also the little note about, I love the word gargantuan. I always have, and I so rarely get to use it in a sentence. But yeah, the thing about like, well, there are multiple things that can kill you in the bush, but the black mamba is the only thing where death is a guarantee. And we get the thing about like, so it can, it can be lethal if it's like 10 to 15 milligrams, but one bite can have anywhere between 100 to 400. Jesus fucking Christ. So yeah, like genuinely, death is guaranteed, And the thing about like, well, if it's in that particular body part, it can be hours, but chest or face, 20 minutes, And yeah, obviously it's not actually 20 minutes before he dies, but it's not a documentary, Mom. And I think that does get us to the... Yeah, I really... I love that we only see the mess that was made. It was reminiscent of the kitchen of the Green, or I guess formerly Green family in volume 1, you know, but the utter mess of all the money on the floor, and then she goes and picks it up because, like, why waste it? You know, Bud's boss is going to feel pretty silly when Bud does not answer his phone in some days. That is one thing. I can't help but wonder if he would call and then she would be able to find the phone based on the noise and get him to send help somehow, but I guess it is unlikely that she'd be able to kill Beatrix ultimately. And, you know, I mean, very likely she will die in like 3 days or so from no water. I mean, who else is going to come and see her? You know, like, does Bud get very many visitors based on the state of his camper? I don't think so. I'm one to talk. You can see some of the, you know, where I live behind me. It's not exactly neat. I do want to be clear. My place is not always, you know, as messy as it looks right now. It's usually worse. I think that does cover the, yeah, so, you know, opens the door, and somehow flying kick, I love how inexplicable that is, because, like, what the fuck did she launch off of, you know? And she got some distance and height on that thing, too. God damn. And, yeah, so she's able to hit L once, and then they start going blow by blow, trading, yeah. And trading blows. Blow by blow is like analysis, I think. And I think that, yeah, I really appreciate how much dirty fighting is there, more than even the Green fight. And yeah, like I already mentioned the spittoon. There's also the swirly. There's the crotch attack, which I guess was also briefly, I wanted to acknowledge how wonderfully absurd and awesome it is when, so she grabs Paimei by the throat, and then he uses muscles in his neck to knock her back, which genuinely does feel like something that could come out of one of these East Asian, you know, action flicks that, yeah. And she also attacks his crotch, and that also does not work. And just, yeah, it's 100% ridiculous. And then we also get, you know, what did Paimei say to make you make him pluck out your eye? And I love how she just can't stop saying, worthless old fool. You know, I called him worthless old fool, and then I killed the worthless old fool. Are you enjoying the fish, you worthless old fool? Which, again, I'm sorry, that's such a trope, you know. And then she says, I have killed your master, and now I'm going to kill you, which, like, I believe is verbatim from at least one of those movies. Or maybe it's just one of those, you know, where it's like, well, sounds like something they would say. And it's, again, like, you did not need that in there at all. Like, it's not like Beatrix was like, let's talk about this. She was already trying to kill Elle, you know, but, yeah. And I think that does cover... Right, and the thing about, like, where'd you get that sword? It's Bud's. He told Bill he pawned his Hattori Hanzo. I guess that makes him a liar, doesn't it? And let's see. So yeah, she leaves there, and I think that's when she goes to talk to Esteban. Now, I'm working my way through the backlog of Outlaw Vern's reviews. I just read the one for Hustle and Flow, and there was a discussion in the comment section of if they tone down Esteban's job too much. They don't mention, yeah, they use the actual word, which once again, I'm currently personally uncomfortable using. And yeah, I do really appreciate they don't really try to make him seem like even remotely a good guy. Like, I don't know, what is the nicest thing about him? He only helps her because that's what Bill wants. That's not nice. I mean, I guess it's nice to Bill, but he also tells her, so is he being, I guess maybe he wants, I mean, in the first one, she wanted, Beatrix wanted Bill to know what she knows, and she wanted Bill to know that she knows she knows. But yeah, it's possible that it's more of that. Other than that, I don't know. I guess he does let one of the young women working there wipe off with the little cloth he has. He says he's susceptible to flattery. Like, that's it. Like, there's not really anything nice about him, you know. And I mean, he meets a conventionally attractive young woman, and he says that he would have made her his top girl. That's how he sees women. Still, he's retired. He's not looking for her. It's not a job interview. And he acknowledges, it's not going to happen now because I'm retired. But I wish, I want to have you fucking men for money. That is what I think when I look at you. The bride, as sadly a number of women in real life, has to face so many misogynists and just, I mean, she can't kill all of them. She needs the information from Esteban, for example, and not exactly the heat of killing him. I am just briefly going to acknowledge this is a white man playing a Mexican character, and while that in and of itself, I'm just going to lay out. So there is a school of thought that says that it is okay, especially if some ancestry is, because there are some Latinos, Latinx individuals who are white passing, same as there are African Americans who are white passing. However, they do make the effort to make, like, you just compare, like, it's nice and easy to, because they're both in the ending credits with the roll call, which is also something I think more movies should still have. But Michael Parks plays two roles, and the other one, that's what he looks like when he's not in makeup, because that's what he looks like in, for example, interviews and such. Yeah, they added makeup to make him look more stereotypically Mexican. And I appreciate that originally it was supposed to be another actor, and that person couldn't make it. And I get wanting to cast Michael Parks again, but, like, cast him as something else then, like, yeah. Or, I guess, hypothetically, I mean, that's the thing. That's something I found fascinating. He cast Lucy Liu because he appreciated her talent, and then he wrote a scene explaining why someone with her background, ethnically, racially, yeah, would have the position that the character does. But he does not do the same for Esteban. So, like, he maybe has more respect for East Asians than South Americans, and that is an American thing. There are a number of Americans, because, like, he likes these East Asian movies, but he maybe has heard a lot of propaganda against South Americans. So, yeah, also not wonderful that he is the most prominent South American character in either of these movies, and that's his job. Like, I appreciate that a lot of major characters are awful in one way or another. Not all of them are criminals. Like, I don't know if Buck, well, what he's doing is illegal, but he's not, like, organized crime. He's not an assassin. I'm not saying that he's better than that, but if, not all the white characters, for example. There are white men in this movie who are not that bad. Like, I don't necessarily, like, the bartender, for example, at Bud's workplace. I mean, I already mentioned the boss is an asshole, but he's not doing the same job as Esteban. There is a distinction to be made between a strip club and an actual, what Esteban is. Right, and to be clear, I'm not sex negative. I'm not against sex work. I just want it to be, there should be protections for those who choose to work within. No one should have to work within it. And that's basically it. I don't personally think that it is inherently better, at the risk of presenting a false dichotomy, to work yourself half to death, I don't know, doing construction, for example, or plumbing or something, compared to sex work. I think we need to be careful now about not putting too much like moral value on sexuality. Keep in mind that a lot of those ideas were invented by people who just wanted people to have less sex because they knew that, one of the things is, if you have very little sex, but you desire it, but you spend your time working, one thing is you might have more time to work, and another is you might be so miserable that you just accept shitty conditions at your work. And this is something that is well documented. Once things start getting at least a little bit better in a way that is not directly linked to the employer, that's why sometimes employers will raise your wages, but only minimally. Is something you see in the movie Scorched, for example. A minimal wage increase, but many, many new, responsibilities at work. That's meant to avoid, for example, unionizing, demanding better labor conditions. I think that does pretty much cover... Yeah, let's see. Right, appreciate the reference. I actually, just in case, made sure to rewatch The Postman Always Rings Twice. Still a classic. I said everything I have to say about it in my video on it, but really, really amazing movie. No wonder Tarantino likes it enough to reference. And that brings us to where she goes to Bill's place. And, opens the door, points the gun, and immediately, as soon as we see inside, we notice the Hattori Hanzo. And that has us thinking that we're about to see a battle between the two of them. And then we instead get the conversations that Tarantino just has a knack for making compelling enough. Because, I remember being surprised, even though I knew Tarantino by that point, watching this in theaters, how much talking there was in this last chunk of the movie. Because in a traditional revenge story, yes, there is a little, but it's just briefly, it's the mwahaha, it's, what's it called? Like a monologuing, the hero gets him monologuing, that sly dog, and then, takes him out in some way that is, cathartic. It's not always killing them. But the fact, because Bill planned this shit, I figure that as soon as Esteban sees Beatrix leave, he calls Bill and tells him she's on her way. She just left my place, which would tell Bill how close she is. And at that point, Bill off-screen tells BB, Mommy woke up. She's coming here. Don't you want to play with her? And just the emotional devastation for both us and the character as it happens. And honestly, a lot of what I would say about this entire last chunk, Schnee said so well, so please watch their video. I was amazed by. There were things in there that I had not at all thought of. Just fantastic analysis, as usual. And Schnee's one of those where, even when I haven't watched it, I've watched every Schnee video on... I cannot believe I'm blanking on that name, but it's been a little while since I thought about that show. But there's that animated show It was based on League of Legends. God damn it, I just don't remember it. I'm sorry. But I've watched every Schnee video on that show and found all of them deeply compelling, even though I haven't watched any of that show at all. I might at some point. It does sound really, really great. Anyway, yeah, so she goes to the door, and then, he and BB play act that mommy shot them. And just, the overwhelming emotion of it. Yeah. And the little thing about, like, mommy did not know that BB was impervious to bullets. I'm pervious to bullets, mommy. Because that's, she didn't catch the entire words. She's just imitating the noises she heard. Because, like, she doesn't know that word yet, obviously. But she gets it. She understands what is being conveyed there, And also the way she falls and that whole thing. And I gotta say, between this and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Tarantino does have a knack for directing young actors to give performances that are genuinely very natural. Like, it's very impressive. And I'm worried I would mispronounce her name, but I'll just say that same actress who plays BB here, went on to play Sandman's daughter in Spider-Man 3, and she also has a substantial role in Untraceable, and Sam Raimi is not necessarily the best director of child actors. Honestly, it's been so long since I watched Untraceable. I think she was fine in that one, but I would definitely say of the three, this is the most convincing. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of awkwardness, but that's like, she's a 40-year-old seeing her mother for the first time. The energy is a little weird. It's not really, and the writing, and she's given some dialogue that is very much Tarantino, and she once again gets it just right. Like, it's genuinely very impressive. And we get the whole thing about, like, well, Bill told BB that mommy was sleeping. I also really appreciate, BB for Beatrix and Bill. And at first she doesn't know, bride doesn't know the name. So, he's like, BB, her name's BB. And then, she slips into mommy mode and plays along, and BB, she's like, no, I didn't mean to kill you, mommy. It's just, oh my fucking god, it's... And she's like, I was just playing pretend. So am I, and maybe it's not so bad. I get too emotional about this scene. Maybe it's not so bad that Schnee covered... Well, it's great that they covered so brilliantly covered the scene. So I'll just very briefly go over, But yeah, these little things, the thing about, a 4-year-old understanding death. And the distinction between, I stepped on it. No, what you strategically... your careful choice of words, sorry. I think strategic was what the Danish subtitle said. But yeah, your careful choice of words was, I accidentally stepped on him, a fish flopping, and then not. Such a clear image of death that a 4-year-old could understand it. Because as the bride said she worried, that's why she tried to elope. Bill has indeed raised BB in a world where violence is, like, they watch this. I mean, I haven't watched the movie that they watch in bed together, but it sounds like it's not appropriate for a 4-year-old. He hasn't had her kill a person, but he is raising her with violence. And, I know I sound like a fucking hippie. Sue me. But I love the detail that they don't immediately say goldfish. She doesn't say, I killed my goldfish. She says, I killed Emilio. And I think it may be in part the name, because like the moment you hear a 4-year-old saying, "I killed Emilio," like you're thinking, did she murder another child or something? Like, what the fuck? Because like, how early does Bill get them started on this? Because we know this is his entire life. Like, we never actually see something completely separate from that. When he is being nice to Beatrix, he's taking her to be trained by the best to kill, or to be used to kill, at least, to be able to kill better. He is not taking her out to a nice dinner. When he agrees, okay, sure, you can watch a movie, he lets her watch this, movie that's not appropriate for her. I can imagine it's violent. From what I've seen, they get very violent. They're the East Asian B movie, martial arts movies. And then, he's like, oh, Emilio, that's the goldfish. Which is also such a great thing, because like, yeah, a 4-year-old doesn't understand. You have to specify, because like, mommy doesn't know that Emilio is your goldfish, sweetie. You know how she just woke up, and yeah. Then we have another mention of the hair. Right, earlier we also had the thing about, I think, was it Bud who said, Bill said that, Beatrix was so smart, and Bud says, oh, she's only smart for a blonde, which, like, I think I already said what I have to say about that whole, yeah, early in the video. Anyway, yeah, but the thing about, mommy's not just pretty. What word should you use? Gorgeous. Yes, mommy is gorgeous. And I really appreciate this balance between, like, he is trying to impart lessons upon BB, like, clearly, because he doesn't say, I'm glad you killed. I hope to raise you to be a killer. And he does try to say, oh, you shouldn't watch something that long right before bed. You need to go to bed. But at the same time, yeah, I don't think it's accidental that the specific type of playing they engage in is playing pretended violence, and specifically the kind he engages in. Imagine, and Uma Thurman plays it so well. Like, imagine all the range of emotion she goes through. She did not know that BB was still alive. She thought she was going there to kill Bill, and she does end up doing that, but she had no idea. She thought she's been grieving her daughter. She's been killing for her daughter, and now she finds out she's still alive. And the first thing is Bill has BB act out being shot by the bride, which is also his way of saying, fuck you're doing, you're bringing a loaded gun into the home of your own child. He likes to fuck with people. That is quite evident throughout these two movies, through his scenes, at least, and the stuff he has others do on his behalf. I really appreciated that the siren thing only played, like, I think halfway through, when she comes face to face with Elle. In the first one it plays, like, very, very early, when she deals with Green, which, if I recall correctly, is right after the opening credits. And I think that does get us to the yeah, so they managed to get BB to sleep. And yeah, I love the little details about, he didn't say that the bride was dead. He said she was asleep, which a 4-year-old, I mean, if you tell a 4-year-old, oh yeah, mommy's asleep, one day she'll wake up and she'll come for you, she'll know you because she dreams of you. Yeah, that's a way a 4-year-old can process a coma, and yeah, the yeah, I'm just gonna talk about, so the yeah, once they get her to bed, they start to have a little bit of a conversation, and yeah, the sword is right there in in the middle of the frame. If this frame is the movie's frame, then the sword is right there. It's sort of in the center and near the bottom, so it draws the eye. or wait, it's in the middle. No, I'm pretty sure that's how it is. And there's a point where she looks at it and the camera pans across it, and she does get up and try to get to her, and then he shoots and says that he's willing to shoot her in the knee, but then he does also put away the gun, and then he shoots her in the knee, but not with a bullet, with the truth serum, which is also such a wonderful trope. Like, I don't remember if, because I've heard of sodium pentothal elsewhere. I can never remember if that's something that only works in fiction or if it does work in real life. But certainly the idea of something that is so much more potent and has no side effects, like I'm pretty sure that is not something that does exist, or at least not back then. And he points out, Yigan makes distinctions. He thinks she is incapable of telling the truth and unwilling to be honest about herself and them, and he has no capacity to trust her without this. And he asks her the questions, and the answers just so powerful. And once again, watch the Schnee video. And yeah, the thing about, like, again, they plan, how they're going to do it, like with Renita. Like, there's a very clear, like, sort of book ending here. The start and end of her revenge quest. Of the 5 that she goes after, there are only 2 who have this sort of domestic situation. And those are not the first and last. It's the last but not the first that she does, but it's the first we see her do. And like, immediately, the first and last thing are that she's confronted first with what she thinks she has lost forever, and then with what she has now, but thought she would never have again, And let's see, I think that does. That's 2. Because keep in mind, when she wakes up, she hears that, she can no longer become pregnant. She would not be able to biologically reproduce ever again. Anyway, I think that does bring us to the thing about, like, well, we're gonna fight right out here, the moonlight. It's a full moon, very romantic way to kill each other. And he also says, well, I guess we could go with dawn, pistols at dawn. I think, well, did they say pistols? Whatever. In the green scene, they were also talking about dawn, and that is, of course, the classic idea of this kind of duel to the death. Pistols at dawn, I mean. And well, no, it was pistols, but dawn is common. And then we have the thing with the I really appreciate how, he keeps, like, so first he doesn't have a real gun to point at her. He just has the toy gun, and they're playing pretend. Then he fires a warning shot and threatens to shoot her in the knee, doesn't. Then he shoots her in the knee, but with the tranq dart. The whole way that it goes. Yeah, because that's also, we keep expecting him to try to shoot her to death. That is something we've been thinking would happen if she was not able to catch him by surprise, basically, throughout these. Because the first thing he does, the first thing that we are aware of him doing, like, we realize he must have been responsible for this violence, the way he's talking. But the first thing he does on screen, even though we don't see him, but we see the result, is shoot her in the head. Also appreciated the use of black and white on occasion in this one, like in the first one. Anyway, so I appreciate, he says, let's go out there, and then when it cuts back from the flashback, he is sitting out there, and she goes to join him. But the whole thing with the pregnancy test, just fantastic. Once again, I think Schnee covers it. And I really admire how much of an impression this actress makes for so little screen time and not a huge amount of dialogue. And I love this, the fucking line. I think that's part of why she sticks in our minds. Not that I have to be at this range, but I'm fucking surgical with this shotgun. Where's her movie? Let me play a video game where she's the player character. Like, goddamn, that is fucking badass. I guess after she leaves this movie, I haven't watched the John Wick movies yet. Did she step into one of those maybe? Because it feels like that's, yeah, if she can't have more screen time in the Kill Bill verse, then maybe that would be an option. Anyway, I think that does bring us to the... So yeah, and they sit down and swords are drawn. And I love this thing of like shoving the sword through is it the table or something? And, this whole thing. And then she does the technique. So despite how much of an uphill battle it was, she managed to win over Pai Mei, who, in Bill's words, does not teach anyone the exploding heart technique. That is simply not a thing. And the beauty of, he said it fairly early in the film, maybe 20 or 30 minutes into the film, we're told, if that happens, you walk 5 steps and then your heart explodes, He dies of a burst ventricle or a broken heart. And that is exactly what we do see, And he doesn't fight it. He accepts it. Just, yeah, I really appreciate how much we come to understand Bill by the end of the film, especially if we watch the Schnee video, and I should probably stop mentioning that. But yeah, just, yeah, incredible. Yeah, I think that might be it. I've actually been talking for as long as the movie is if you count the end credits. Anyway, I think that does cover absolutely all that I have to say. Yeah. I did appreciate that, yeah, so Karen, goes to the room that the person is staying in and, pretends that, oh, I belong here to get access to someone that she's there to kill. So, appreciate how Agent 47 that is. Of course, she's in disguise, so she's given up the suit-only approach, and she's got a shotgun, which, I mean, I appreciate. Certainly, personally, when I go for Silent Assassin, I prefer to also just go for suit-only, so once you put on disguise, you might as well, go loud.